Hello, this is Fred Sirix from Fittest and countless other TV programs. Just to say that if you want to see me not being impersonated by Alistair McGowan, maybe watch Paul Boross and the Humourology podcast. Very difficult thing to say for a Frenchman. Humourology. I can't say it. It's difficult, no? It's difficult. Humourology.
Welcome to the Humourology podcast with me, Paul Boross, and my glittering lineup of guests from the world of business, sport and entertainment, who are going to share their wisdom and their use of humour. Humourology is the study of how humour can dramatically improve your business success and your life. Humourology puts the fun into business fundamentals, increases the value of your laughing stock, and puts a punchline back into your bottom line. Our guest on this edition of the Humourology podcast is a multi-award-winning impressionist, stand-up comic and actor who has been on stage, on screen and on air for over 30 years. His primetime top-rating TV comedy series regularly attracted tens of millions of viewers. His dedication to the craft of laughter is legendary. This total tenacity and love of learning recently led him, in just 4 years, from being a complete novice at the piano to having the #1 album in the official classical charts. Alistair McGowan, welcome to the Humourology podcast.
Thank you, Paul. I enjoyed that introduction. That was quite nice.
Well, it's all true.
Well, yeah, tens of millions, I think is... No, what did you say? Tens of millions. Yeah, no, it was about 8 million was our top audience in those days, but that's pretty respectable at the time. We were in the top 10 when we were on BBC One, but boy, it's a long time ago. It's 15 years. No, I keep saying that from... It's 17 years now since we stopped being on air, I think 16 years. 2004 was our last big impression, which surprises a lot of people. They say, was it that long ago? And it's very fondly remembered, but yeah, it was a long time ago.
Well, isn't it like everything that's fondly remembered? It seems like only yesterday, and it still feels fresh. But because some of those impressions, those people are still going. So it was a classic.
No, I mean, certainly when we started, I remember doing Hugh Edwards, and Hugh at the time obviously was reading news. I think it's 6 o'clock in those days. And I remember one of my neighbours at the time in Clapham coming up to me and saying, indeed, it was the 6 o'clock news. And she said, I'm very much enjoying the show, she said, you're doing on BBC One. And I particularly love that Welsh newsreader character that you've invented. How nice to put that alongside all the well-known impressions. And that shows how long ago it was. But what was interesting about that also was that she, being a Londoner, didn't watch the news at 6 because she was still getting home from work. So she only watched the news at 10, didn't realise that this Welshman was then reading the news every night on BBC One at 6 o'clock, and has now, obviously, as you say, progressed and is a household name, if not national treasure.
It's fabulous. I mean, the Jesuits say, give me a child of 7 and I will give you the man. Was the young Alistair McGowan funny?
No, actually. It's nice of the Jesuits to say that. I would probably say, give me a child of 7 and I'll give it back to you after about 5 minutes. I've never had children and I don't really. Yes.
You can have
anyway,
mine.
We won't go down that route. No, I was... my father, actually, and that's where I owe my humour to, who I owe my humour to, and where it comes from, I think, is my father. And I was very lucky through having done programmes on the BBC, like The Big Impression for 4 years, as I said, to be asked to do Who Do You Think You Are in 2007, I think it was. And my father had died in 2003, just when we were completing our last series of Big Impression, which made finishing that pretty challenging in many ways. But I went and did Who Do You Think You Are and found out all about his roots. Now, I knew that he'd been born in India. It turned out his family, he always said, oh, but my mother and father just happened to be there. That's why I was born there. No, they just happened to be there. Well, they'd happened to be there, the McGowan, since 1750. So they've been in India quite a long time and were part of the Anglo-Indian community. Now, this is all relevant to humour because as a community, they weren't really English. They weren't really Indian. They didn't quite belong in any camp. They were Christians. They were loyal to the English ruling class, if you like, but they were also had a foot in the traditional Indian camp. So I don't think they ever felt they belonged anywhere. And after independence, the Anglo-Indians went all over the world, Australia, Canada, parts of the Commonwealth, and particularly to King's Heath near Birmingham and into Middlesex, where my father went. So the point is that he came to England and never really was part of the culture, didn't have it growing up. So he was always interested. This is the point. He was always interested in our language. He couldn't replicate any accent, but he was fascinated by how many different ways of pronunciation there were, different ways of pronouncing things. And that was something that really informed me. And having had my father's eye on it and his ear on it, that's what gave me an awareness of language, and I suppose a sort of, playing with the language, being ultra aware of how everybody spoke, because he came to it afresh, age 23 or something.
Do you think that assimilation into a new culture is helped by humour?
I think it is, yeah. I think my dad was always a witty person, but there's no doubt that his wit really helped him settle here. And I think we all do it. It's one of the ways in which accents are changed. Now, I think we've talked about this personally, you and I, but I have this absolute horror of the way people all speak now, like Australians, and they go up at the end of their sentences. It drives me absolutely nuts. I was not brought up with that way of speaking. If you wanted to make a point, you made a point. You didn't make it into a question. To me, all these young people now, they sound like they haven't got the courage of their own convictions. They don't believe what they're saying. But the point I'm making is that it's to fit in. Everybody does it. And so everybody now has started doing it. Even parents of teenage children do it because their children do it. And you think, you weren't brought up like that. You're older than me. Why are you suddenly doing that? We have an innate desire to fit in. And that's why, a lot of people will change their accent, drop an accent if they move around the country or move to London or whatever. So accent, I think, a big part of it. But humour, yes, of course. People want to make people laugh. Making people laugh is one of the greatest things you can do. It's getting harder. I think it's getting harder because you've got to be more and more sensitive.
So do you think it's narrowed on what is considered funny now?
Yes, I think so. I mean, looking back on my television career and stand-up career, I've always been very careful, I think, throughout my 30 years in the business, not to offend anybody. I've always been really surprised, in fact, when I've arrived at particularly corporate dues. I don't think it would happen now because I don't think anybody would expect you to, but certainly 10 or 15 years ago, people say, we're having a function and we want you to entertain. And just one thing, we don't want you to do anything racist and anything sexist. And you think, well, why are you even asking that question? It's just our generation of comedians would never have even thought about that sort of thing, I hope. But that was something that was still something that had to be said. But now, of course, people get offended by so many other things, and the words that we use, our generation, our mid-50s, to describe whatever situation, some of them now, you use them out of habit, and they are out of date, and they can offend people, and you think, I didn't mean to offend, that's just the word I was brought up with. Sensibilities have changed, and as I say, you try and be sensitive, and then you realise that you're being sensitive to people of our age, and younger people have greater sensitivities, and so I think humour has become very hard on stage, and certainly within the workplace. Flirtation or playfulness or wordplay, whatever you want to call it, can cause offence, and I hope that it's not stopping people from daring to be witty, but it does go through my mind as a professional all the time.
Well, it is bizarre because I should tell our listeners that we originally met at working the Comedy Store and that circuit, and one of the fundamental rules there was that we were a shift and you could do no sexist, no racist material as, if you like, a backlash to the old Clubland comics. So when it's even narrowed further than that, I'm the same. I find it quite sort of like I'm thinking, can I say that?
Yeah, and also, I mean, I remember years ago. I mean, I started in 1990. In 1992, I can remember it vividly. That was about 94. I was in Manchester, and I'd done a gig the night before, and I hung around that night, stayed with a friend. The next day, I went and bumped into one of the audience members, and this fella came up to me and he said, enjoyed the show. He said, but you shouldn't be doing Julian Clary. You shouldn't be doing Julian Clary because you're not gay. And you're doing Julian Clary, and it's offensive to the gay community if you're doing Julian Clary. And I thought, I had to sort of be dragged away from an argument with this guy by my friend because I was saying, if I don't do people as an impressionist, everybody did Julian in those days. Of course, we all did. You knew him well, and probably still do, Paul. And it was a wonderful voice too. And Julian was everywhere on the television and being very funny. I thank you. But if I said, "Oh, I'm not going to do gay characters because I'm not gay," then I'm sort of being aware that there's a difference, and I'm ostracizing that community, if you like, from my act. And you think, what sort of world is that when you can't do, or nowadays Alan Carr, people say, "Oh, you can't do Alan Carr because you haven't got big teeth," or something, or because you're not gay, or because you're not from Northampton. And you think, well, on what grounds can you now impersonate anybody or make any joke? It's just gone so far that, and also causing offence to a point is what motivated a lot of comedians of our generation. Not causing offence to individuals or groups, I suppose, but I mean, look at someone like Jimmy Carr. He pushes it as far as he can and will always upset somebody with practically every joke he comes out with. But you accept that and you think, yeah, but it's a joke, But then, do jokes reinforce stereotypes? Do they reinforce a pecking order within society and within an office situation, within a business situation? I think that's important. Are you, with your humour, actually reinforcing a stereotypical situation?
Well, this argument's been going on for years, because when I was growing up, my best friend's father was William G. Stewart, who knew Johnny Spate, who used to write "Till Death Us Do Part."
Yeah.
And Johnny was fiercely working class, fiercely intelligent, but presumed that he was showing up the Alf Garnets of this world. But it's always been the same way, that, some people went, yeah, Alf Garnet's right when he does that. But, I mean, you have to allow humour to have that breadth of being able to poke fun at anyone. Otherwise, we close down that whole avenue of being able to prick the bubble of hypocrisy, don't we?
We do. And also, I mean, sometimes I question impressions and why I do impressions and what that's all about. And I think there is exactly that phrase, pricking the bubble of hypocrisy, on pomposity, whatever else. But I was aware, certainly doing the comedy circuit, I mean, at the time, it was people like, Eddie Izzard was around, and people like Eddie, and then Jack D was around, and, I used to do my Jack D, and Dylan Moran, was on the circuit a lot. And Joe Brown and people like that, everybody was there. And I do people like Joe, or whoever it might be. And it was sort of affectionate. It was nothing was ever meant by it. And also within the comedy world, a bit like sportsmen, I suppose, you're used to giving it out, so you take it a bit. But when I started working in the theatre, you mentioned the acting in your lovely introduction, I was very aware that I could do, after a couple of weeks of rehearsals, some of the members of the cast. But I never did it, because you think, if I start to do a few people in the cast, it undermines possibly, I think actors are a little bit more sensitive, but you're also working in a group. So you don't want to suddenly create some sort of thing where I'm making fun of somebody or their voice, making them self-conscious of their voice. So I had to deliberately, in that situation, back off and not do impressions of people in the acting company. And again, you think within a business situation, it was sort of all right, I think, to do the boss, because the boss is, but you don't want the boss to see you doing the boss. But do you do everybody within the company? And are you passing comment on some people, or is it just a bit of fun?
Well, it's the difference between punching up and punching down, isn't it? Which is, because we've obviously all done a lot of corporates together, and it was always seen as fair game for the CEO or the boss to have the mickey taken out of them. And the better they took that, in inverted commas, abuse, the more they were lauded as being a great boss and he can take a joke. How important do you think that is?
I think it's very important. I mean, I've been surprised sometimes doing corporate events where the head of the organisation will introduce me after they've made quite a lengthy speech. And that's always great fun, because if they've got a doable voice, you've only got to kind of just give something like a representation of it, a replication of it, and people love it, because you're doing the boss. You're doing the boss. But I mean, to us, you go in and the boss, obviously you're respectful to him, but he doesn't have the status that he does for the staff. So that's always very enjoyable to make fun of. If there's any sort of, if anyone's got a list or, again, you start making fun of people, but or a strong accent or whatever. There's a fellow who actually I think is the funniest corporate person I've ever met. I'm pretty sure his name is Steve Lee, and I believe he's left his job now, but he used to work for the Chartered Institute of Waste Management. And I did 2 or 3 events for Steve, and he had a very strong West Midlands accent. I mean, he wasn't unlike Adrian Giles, to be perfectly honest with you, but he'd always do this very serious speech about waste management and what we are all doing. And then he'd say, "Now, please welcome to entertain us, here's Alistair McGowan." And of course, all I had to do was say, "Thank you very much there to Steve Lee." And a massive response. And you go, "Oh, thank you, Steve, for having such a strong accent." He gave me quite a few lines, and one of them I had to ask him if I could use in my act, and I did use it for quite a while. He told me that in the Midlands, because he's from the West Midlands, as I said, in the Black Country, he said that you could have a whole conversation with the words "all right, mate," and that I can't remember now the 5 stages of it, but it was something like it's an inquiry about your health, then it's concern, and then it's "are you sure you're all right?" and it's "yes, I'm fine. Right, let's proceed with our conversation." So it goes something like this: it goes, "All right, mate. All right, mate. All right, mate. All right, mate. All right, mate." And the whole thing was, "Are you sure you're all right?" "Yes, I am." "Oh, something there, isn't there?" "Yes, but let's not talk about it. Let's get on." "All right, mate. All right, mate. All right, mate. All right, mate. All right." And he did it brilliantly. He did it absolutely brilliantly. So I used to use that for quite a while in my act, thanks to Steve Lee. And I think that's the thing for me with humour in life and certainly speech making on stage as yourself, not as an actor, as yourself at some corporate event, is the difference between, you see it at wedding speeches as well, the difference between being funny and being witty. And for me, I've always been interested in wit. And I think wit is the thing, actually, which is probably more attractive in the business world and possibly in life, and certainly in the dating game. I mean, I would always resist anybody who says, "Here's a joke for you," because you go, "Oh, okay." But when someone says something witty, or they play with words, or they just make the language interesting through the use of humour, but not telling jokes, that's what I find funny, and that's what arrests people. Interesting use of language, witty use of language. And there's a big difference between wit and comedy, I think.
I think you're completely right. And that ability, and I think authenticity comes into when you're witty, you are authentic with yourself, but not trying too hard.
Yeah. And I think also wit generally, for me, I mean, I don't know what the proper definition of it is generally playing with what you're hearing as well. So, I mean, obviously within a speech, that's different. But if there's a dialogue going on between 2 people, wit, it demands that you're picking up on what the other person has said, generally, which means that you've listened. And I think any communication with anybody, whether it's in business or in life or in a pub or in bed, it's about listening, and people love to be listened to. And if you don't listen, you don't learn about them, about life, about work, about anything. And so I think that's when wit really impresses people, because it says, you've listened to what I've said, and you've raised me, if you like, in the poker game of our dialogue, in the poker game of our, you've taken it and you've raised it. And that's what wit is all about, I think.
I think that's so true, and it's something.
It was quite beautiful, wasn't it? That was a beautiful.
It was, and that'll be in the book. But no, it's the word listening keeps coming up over and over again with really smart, really witty people. And I think that's what it's all about. You have to be engaged and properly listening. And if you're talking to an audience, people always think that's bizarre, because most people who aren't good at public speaking are actually listening to their internal dialogue and just trying to get the words right, when in fact it's a symbiotic process, isn't it, with the audience? When the audience does something or reacts in a certain way, your story about the CEO with the Black Country accent was the ultimate bit of listening. Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that I think I've on very few occasions been asked to make a serious speech about things, generally environmental companies have said, "Will you make a speech for us?" And I've only done it maybe 5-10 times. And I find that really difficult, because then, it's difficult with the environment. It certainly was 15 or so years ago when I was making those sort of speeches. Nobody was interested. Nobody was taking climate change seriously. So they'd say, try and put a bit of wit in there. Try and put a bit of humour in there. And of course, you end up undermining the message. And that's the important thing with wit, is you've got to use it sparingly, because otherwise you can undermine what you're saying. And obviously, as a comedian, there's an expectation that are going to be funny. But then that expectation that we put on ourselves means that by being funny, you get a laugh. So the laugh tells you you're doing well. Now, when you're making a speech that isn't about getting laughs, I mean, some of the speeches I've seen about the coronavirus thing at these press conferences, I just think, boy, it's difficult enough. But the fact that they're not getting a reaction, obviously they're not going to get a laugh. But you think, how do you make a speech like that? How do you know it's going well? How do you know that people aren't bored? And I admire people who can do that hugely. But I suppose the skill set, if you like, is not the same, but it's similar. It's making people listen. It's not rushing. It's choosing your words carefully. Here's an example for you. This is very obscure. But years ago, one of my favorite programs was a late night BBC Two program called The Late Review. This is 20 years ago. And there was a guy on there, I can barely do his accent now, called Tom Paulin. And Tom was a poet, and he was from somewhere on the border, I think, of North and South Ireland. And he would talk incredibly slowly, and he would find every word that he wanted to use. Now, he must have been, I suppose, my age then. I was 20 years younger. My girlfriend at the time was late 20s, mid-20s. And she said, God, that Tom Paulin's so sexy. And I said, why is he sexy? He was handsome enough, but, he wasn't Liam Neeson. And she said, it's just the way he chooses his words so carefully. If he chooses his words that carefully, how sensitive is he to everything else, to a woman's needs, to his friend's needs, to anything? And, obviously you shouldn't ever lie about who you are and do things just for effect. But I do think, and it's something I struggle with, talking quickly. I'm talking slowly because I talk quickly. But when you do slow down and make your point, and that's the tragedy in a way of things like the Today program on Radio 4, it's always cram this in, cram that in. Everyone's got to talk so fast. And you said, by talking that fast, you're not getting your point across. You're not giving the listener a chance to come with you. And there's one thing certainly where Shakespeare helps a lot as an actor, and maybe even as a speech maker in business, is that with Shakespeare, you have to guide your audience. You have to almost treat them like they're hard of hearing, if you will, so that you have to really enunciate. You have to really carry them with you without seeming to patronize, without seeming to hold back. And that's the thing, is that pace of delivery. I think any speech making is just taking your time, but obviously not taking too much time. And that's the greatest dilemma we all have as speech makers and as comics.
Well, it's interesting. There's that classic Michael Caine quote that powerful people speak slowly.
That's probably a better way of saying what I've just been spending 4 minutes saying.
No, but
powerful people speak slowly.
Powerful people speak slowly.
Speak slowly, which may be why he's always done that himself.
And you know what? He goes, because they expect to be listened to. And people who don't expect to be listened to speak quickly so that they don't get interrupted. And there is a psychological model whereby you're going, actually, that's true. So anybody who wants to appear more powerful can actually just slow everything down.
They can. But as we said, it is a tightrope because, for instance, in my experience of doing lots of impressions of football managers over 20, 30 years, one of my favourite people that I've done, and I know a lot of people won't even, I was going to say remember, but I think probably know is the right word, is a man called Howard Wilkinson, who used to manage, he managed Sheffield Wednesday as well as Leeds United, I think Notts County as well at one point. But Howard used to take so long that you just got bored. You thought, Howard, please just find a word. Doesn't matter, just any word. Just find a word. But in a program like Match of the Day, which is where I get my football, where everything is helter-skelter. You go, you're going club talking so quickly, you know, and you've got Gary Lineker and the boys, Shearer talking pretty quickly. Let's get on to the next thing. Let's analyse that.
It is a strange dichotomy, isn't it, really? Because actually in psychology we say that if you are meeting other people, you should actually get into their rhythm, because that way you'll get more rapport if you get into their rhythm. So he's standing out, but is he standing out for the right reasons?
Well, yes, and also I think if you're, doing a speech at the conference centre in Birmingham at 3:30 in the afternoon on day 3 of a 3-day conference, it's 3:30 and you're talking that slowly, people are going to be asleep. But I suppose the thing is variety. That's the thing, speech making, and within a comedy act, I think is important. Variety of pace, and if when you get to the the really serious bit, then you can slow down, and then you can make your point, and then you've got people, and also by changing the pace. You're drawing people in, because you think, hang on a minute, he was talking really quickly a minute ago, and now, why is he taking so long? Oh, something interesting is coming. So going from one to the other is really useful. And I find that as a comedian too, sometimes just to slow right down, and just to take a breath. It makes you look confident, and it draws people in.
Yeah, no, so that's something that everyone in business can learn from actors. I know you trained at the Guildhall, and comedians, is pacing. I'm always talking about, if you keep on talking at the same rate like that, you'll eventually either put people into a deep trance or they'll just fall asleep.
Well, Alan Davis, I remember working with him, and again, this is 30 years ago when Alan was starting out on the circuit as well.
We all worked
early
together,
90s.
Didn't we? Yeah.
Yeah. And you probably remember Al he'd come on at the store late at night, midnight sometimes, rowdy crowd, pretty rowdy. And he'd stand there and he'd sort of walk around a little bit, and he'd sort of talk to them a little bit with his floppy hair and his T-shirt. And then he wouldn't get a laugh, and he'd say, don't worry, it's meant to be shit, I'm just warming up. I'm like an athlete, I'm just limbering up. So a few words here, I'll get on with it in a minute. And the minute he did that, you thought, oh, okay, he's confident with this burbling. And I like the analogy of warming up like an athlete. Yeah, why should you come on and do your first gag within 3 words, which I also admire. But it was an interesting technique. You were drawn in by this slowness, and then he would do his stuff quite quickly, and then again he'd take a bit of time and slow down, and out with the next bit. The other thing I think, which as an actor, as a linguist, if you like, whatever I am, that I've always liked as in speech makers, and you don't see much now. I think a lot of younger people are encouraged from the work I do in advertising, I know this, not to repeat a word within a sentence. It's like the greatest sin. Never mind punctuation or interesting, that's all gone out the window. But the one thing they seem to be taught at school is never repeat the same word twice within about a minute. And you think, no, repetition of a word, of an idea, of a rhythm, which I've just done there, is sometimes the most effective way. And you'll see people now, politicians even, who will say things like, the point of this policy, and they won't repeat it. They'll say, the idea of this suggestion, the crux of this new body of ideas. You think, just repeat the thing. It's the really useful thing, is to repeat a word, to repeat a phrase. People don't always take it in.
Well, I mean, if you took the Martin Luther King speech and went, I have a dream, I had a bit of
that's a better example.
Waking, I was half asleep the other day.
The speech came to me while I was in bed. Yeah, repetition is very, very useful. Although, of course, as a comic, don't repeat the joke. Don't repeat the joke. They don't want to hear the same joke. Although, again, look at Harry Hill. Great example of that, of somebody who will go back to, in his stand-up, a joke again and again and again. Not tell the same joke, but almost the same. Milton Jones. Brilliant at it, my other grandfather, and you just love it. I mean, he doesn't do them one after the other. It's 5 minutes and 10 minutes, 15 minutes in between each one. But that going back as a comedian and doing a callback, as we call it, people love a callback. And it also, I've always thought, there is, among any audience, they love to pat themselves on the back and go, I know what he's talking about, or I remember that from earlier on. So people love a callback because it shows that you trust them to have listened again, and that they have been listening, because they go, oh yeah, I remember that. He did that earlier on. Remember that bit? Yeah, that's from earlier on. So yeah, calling back is a very useful technique.
That's interesting from a comedy perspective about the best comedy requires people to just make that leap where they, and I like your idea that they're patting them on the back going, I'm smart.
People love patting themselves on the back. I think that's true, and it's probably a bit controversial and negative, but I find that that's the case with a lot of political humour, which I've never responded to. People always think as an impressionist, I must be doing political satire, I must be interested in it. I am not, and I don't. But I do think a lot of the audiences who go to that pat themselves on the back because they think, oh, I remember when President Trump said that, or I remember when Barack Obama said that, and I remember when Ted Heath said that, aren't I clever? And you think, yeah, but it's not funny. You're just sort of patting yourself on the back for remembering something. But anyway, that's a beef that we should probably edit out.
Enough of the topical humour with Ted Heath,
Well, that's what I mean. They think, yeah, how clever am I? But I was going to do an impression of that. Oh, yeah. One of the callbacks I started doing, I was going to say recently, it was back in whenever we could still do live gigs, so at least 6 months ago. But I was doing this callback more or less for the first time, and I loved it. I had this idea, which I wanted to put in for a long time, about what people sound like they're going to say next and how useful that is for an impression. So what you're going to say next, but don't say, if you like, reveals a lot about your character. And for me, impressions are about the human voice, and the voice is about your character. It reveals something through your voice. So, for instance, the first one was that Cheryl Cole, or whatever she's going by nowadays, I think she's just Cheryl now. Cheryl. But Cheryl always sounds like the next thing she would say after any given sentence would be, and that's why I had to kill him. She just has this sort of very, very dark attitude to life and to people. And so that was lovely when I'd say, and that's why I had to kill him. And then I'd do 2 or 3 more jokes, because I'd tried it once, one after the other, and it didn't work. And then I'd say, Richard Madeley, always sounds like the next thing he'd say in any given sentence would be, I'm not rubbish, and this programme isn't shit. And again, it's his attitude. There's a sort of defensiveness there. No, this is worth listening to. I'm not rubbish, and this programme isn't shit. So you don't hear him say that, but it sounds like what's defining him. But by separating them with a joke in between each one and then going back to it, I won't give you the third one because it'll decrease the laugh if ever I do it again in front of anyone who might be watching or listening. But actually, the third one was Steve Bruce, who was Newcastle manager, still is at the moment. And he always sounds like the next thing you're going to say is, well, I can't believe they've given us the job, to be honest with you. But by separating those out, the callback with a slight variation each time really, really helps. And again, that's not telling jokes. That's not me saying, oh, here's a funny thing for you. Here's a funny joke for you. It's an observation. It's a bit of wit. It's hard to recreate that. I mean, if every business person could do all that sort of stuff, they'd be doing stand-up comedy. But they are useful techniques.
Well, that takes me to the fact, is everyone funny? Or is it a gift from God? Is it something you can work at?
When I started doing comedy, aged about 24, and went back to my hometown at Christmas, which I still used to do that every year after leaving university and everything else, you'd all go back to Evesham and meet up in the pubs at Christmas. And at that time, when I just finished drama school and I started doing the comedy circuit, I'd tell people what I was doing, and they would all go, you're doing it, because I gave no hint of this when I was young. As I say, my father did it. I was not somebody who went around making people laugh at all. I was serious. I did sport. I did a bit of drama, but again, when I liked the comedy side of that, but I wasn't a witty person. I was very shy. I still am. So I think that can stop people from being funny, if you like, is that they've been in a situation like in those dressing rooms at the Comedy Store where everybody's being funny. And I would say one thing eventually, and people go, huh? And you think, I can't do it. And I now have a real thing in my head that if I'm in a group situation, I shut up completely because I'm never the one whose voice cuts through. So, yeah, I don't know if everybody can be funny. There's a lot of things in their way. But again, listening is the most important thing. Are you listening to what's being said? Can you pick up on that? So you can improve your funniness. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I always talk to people about the listening thing being, because people get very, very worried about their own internal dialogue, when in fact
Yeah.
all you have to do is listen to the other person. And I think
Yeah.
pretty much everybody, if they go out with their mate for a cup of coffee, they're not going with a list of questions like, did you see the match on Saturday?
Yeah.
You know,
I do have one friend who does that. He writes them on his hand. He says, right, these are the things we've got to talk about. But that's quite endearing, because it means that he wants to know these things, and they're not sort of like just prompts in case the conversation dries up. That he's thought about it in advance. These are the things I want to know. I've thought about you beforehand, and I want to know these things. I find that quite endearing. But he still listens to it and picks up on it. In fact, this is a big name drop and show off thing, but years ago when I was doing all my telly stuff, I was very lucky to be, on all these chat shows when you go and promote everything, and was interviewed by Jonathan Watt, who, is fantastic, and by Graham Norton, who was also very, very good, but by Parkinson 3 times. And Parkinson really was, something else. And he's often regarded as the king of all the chat shows, and sadly you don't see him now. He's got to that age now where he can't do it anymore. But he said to me in 1999, when he was still at it, and I was about to do my first show with him, he said, I'll ask you the first question. This is off air. He said, I'll ask you the first question. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. He said, and after that, I've got a list of questions. He said, but it's just a chat. It's just a chat. So I know vaguely where they are. They'll be on my knee. You might see me look down. In fact, I've seen you do it now. Those sketches you do, you wouldn't make it. But I only glance down. There's not an order to it. We just go where it goes. It's just a conversation. But the first question I'll ask will be this, just so you know. And he'd tell you his first question. But the rest were exactly that. And if ever I've interviewed anybody myself, that's the approach I take. And he's so right. You think, you've got 20 questions or 10 questions. You roughly know what they are. But you don't want to just go question 1, question 2, question 3, because then you're not listening again, and the audience aren't listening again.
Is it important to be able to laugh at yourself?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I said that rather trite thing about EastEnders. But I think people in that sort of situation do not laugh at themselves. They don't just step away and go, I was a bit stupid there, wasn't I? If only I could have seen myself. I must have looked right here. Why did I lose my temper like that? And if you don't do that, who are you, and we all have to laugh at ourselves. I think it's one of the most important things, to laugh at your own failings, and not in a sense of, I'm a terrible person or anything like that, but just to admit that sometimes you probably looked a bit stupid when you did something. Or footballers must do it all the time. They have to. How do you get over missing an open goal? You've got to laugh at yourself. Federer missing those 2 match points against Djokovic last year, to win his, whatever it was, 8th, 9th Wimbledon. I mean, I hope how do you get over that? You have to laugh. That's where humour comes in. You have to just say, And I think when people are ill or faced as I hope you're not, well, I know you've been through it yourself. We've all been through it, losing parents, or seeing parents getting older now and suffering with illnesses and awful things. Sometimes you can only laugh about what they've said. If they've got dementia, you can only laugh. If they've got some sort of, mania or whatever thing that's changing their mind, making their mind into mush, because otherwise, you end up in a heap of tears. So, laughter in those situations is extraordinary. And I think that's when I've been at my funniest lately, is trying to cope with some of the things that life throws at you, which again goes back to why I suppose some comics and actors go on stage in the first place. It is a response to something. This is a coping mechanism with
it's
life.
A release as well, isn't it? It's actually, and I always think that humour humanizes. And for people listening to this podcast, you have to know that it's not a weakness; it's a strength, and it is seen as a strength. So, do people laugh enough in their own workplaces? Now, you and I get to step into people's workplaces, and maybe go to certain workplaces, so we're not in there day in, day out, but people do you think there's enough? Is it encouraged enough? Is it?
I think certainly a lot of the contact I have now is with people just in shops, and there are some people who have a glint in their eye who will engage in some wit and exchange, and others who just don't. And life is always better when people are able to have a bit of fun or whatever else. But I think there's so many different sorts of humour, different ways of making yourself and other people laugh. And I've never been, and I sort of wish I was really, but my sister's favourite phrase is, "Oh, we had such a laugh because," and I've never been in that situation where I'll laugh at something because I think it's clever, or I'll laugh at something because it's witty, or I'll laugh at something maybe just because it's a cat falling over or a cat doing something stupid. Yes. But I'm not great at having a laugh, and I think a lot of people are very good at that workplace banter, which is often the same sort of jokes actually over and over again, and you have to join in with them, and you should know it like rote, like "How are you? I'm fine. How are you?" There's certain jokes that people come out with, and I've never been able to do those jokes. And again, maybe it's because my father was from abroad. I never learned that behaviour of when someone says X, you say Y, and then you both laugh together, and it's not that funny, but you laugh. So like Tony Hawk's everything. But that's what happens. People just, you say that and you say that, and then you laugh, and that's social interaction, and on you go. So no, I hope people do laugh at their work. But I think that's another difference with comedy. If we're on the comedy thing again, is silliness, and that's something that I've never responded to, and I find that hard to watch. Is people being silly, and during lockdown, I've actually, my mission, if you like, has been to watch as many classic movies as possible. And I found all these wonderful stations channels that show old films and watch lots of them. And it's been extraordinary going back to something after 30 years that you thought was really funny then. And you go back and you go, well, that's not funny, that's just silly. But there is a great place for silliness. But I think maybe, do we grow out of silliness? I don't know. But a lot of people confuse being silly with being funny, with being witty, and you just choose whichever one makes you happiest, I think, in the end.
Well, but some people manage to get the balance. I mean, we both grew up with Monty Python, and Monty Python managed to actually cross from silly to witty to smart to...
Yeah, that's right. And someone like Lee Evans, who I adore working with Lee Evans, because you got to watch Lee Evans. And Lee could do all three of those things really well. And I used to get so annoyed with a lot of people who'd say, "Oh, he just pulls funny faces and falls around." No, Lee Evans did the lot and was brilliant at all those things. I think the choice of what you do in business, in terms of, are you going to be funny or witty? I think silly is probably something not to do if you're making a speech. And I'm sure we've all been there where you've seen somebody just try and pull something off which is silly, and it doesn't work. Telling a joke, yes, as I say, all right. Being witty, best. Using language interestingly, listening to people, slowing down, brilliant. But doing something silly doesn't generally play, in my experience, watching it, doesn't play very well.
Well, as you know, I've coached a lot of CEOs to do big speeches, and one of the things that when you first turn up, they've got all these ideas. I could come on with a clown's head, and you go, do you know what? If that falls flat, you're done for the whole speech.
Yeah.
And, and what we've got to do is find something that naturally flows from you, not something that comes from left field and is silly and, no, they'll really love it. And I always say a lot of my job is talking people out of things. It's like you really don't want to do that.
But I think that's when, because we've all done it. You've all done stuff. I mean, I used to do this routine, this opening thing, which I actually saw, who was it? Frank Skinner, I think it was. Yeah, Frank did it recently as well. And I thought, that's the thing I used to do. Not that he'd seen me do it, because I don't think Frank's seen me work for about 25 years, to be perfectly honest with you. But I used to come on, this is about 2008, and it was quite a new thing then. I used to come on the stage, and I would, instead of going to the mic directly, I would walk all the way around the stage like this in a zigzag. And I'd get to the mic and I'd say, "Sorry about that, I was in the post office earlier today." And I thought it was a great gag, but people didn't laugh at it because they thought, you wouldn't be in a post office. Why would you in a post office? And why are you in a queue? Surely people just deliver your mail for you. And it just didn't play somehow. But I thought it was a really good idea. But the thing was, it was quite silly and it took a long time to do it. And I ended up with egg on my face the 4 or 5 times I did it, because you think, that took about 25 seconds and nobody laughed at it. But the thing is, as we've learned very early on, and you can only play that card 3 times in your 20-minute set or whatever, if something doesn't work, just acknowledge it. Just say, "Well, that didn't go very well, did it?" Or, "Yeah, that felt really funny when I thought of it earlier on," because then people will laugh at the fact that you have effectively laughed at yourself. You've said, "Yeah, that I own up, that didn't work," because That's a great thing to do, just to admit your failure. But as I say, in a comedy set of 20 minutes, you can only play that card 3 times, and then it's like, you really should have thought about this before you did it.
No, and I think it's really worth pointing out to anybody listening who wants to get better at any aspect of humour, is that admission. It's the hands up moment, and that humanises you. And and by the way, you can learn this by watching comedians. Comedians die all the time, but it's how they do it.
And somehow I think getting older, which is no help to anybody as advice for a young person, but it matters less somehow to you. And then if you do mess up, you're much likely to just go, ugh, and carry on, rather than be so tense because you think, oh, if I hadn't made that mistake, I'd have got another 3 gigs out of it, and then I'd have been on telly, and then I'd become a millionaire, and it was because that joke went wrong. But when you're out the other side of it a bit, you're a bit more relaxed, and the relaxation somehow makes you better, which is ironic because, you want to be better when you're younger.
No, but really what's happening from a psychological point of view is that, there's the old saying, if you want anybody to go into any state, you have to go into the state first. And as soon as you're on stage and you tense up, guess what? The audience will do the same thing. So actually, at that point, you've lost them. But if you stay relaxed and you go, I have no idea what I'm going to say next. But you know what? As soon as I remember, I'll get back to you. And the audience just go, oh, okay, we'll go with that.
Yeah, but it's still hard to remember. And I still make those mistakes. And, doing my tour last year with Jasper Carrott, there were days where Jasper, who's a brilliant mentor, really, he would say to me, too fast, or he'd say, slow down, or, first half was a bit speedy, and not all the time, but just now and again, because he could tell that I could still get unnerved by something if 3 jokes don't work in a row. Sean Locke said that years ago. He said, you've got 3 goes at it. Like a football manager's only ever 6 games from the sack, they say. In comedy, you can be doing really well for 19 of your 20 minutes, and then suddenly you do 3 bad jokes and go, this guy's rubbish. And you go, all the other ones wrote really well. Yeah, but you've just done 3, one after the other. Go. So you're always a bit tense and a bit nervous, but somehow you have to get rid of that. And it's not easy, no matter how experienced you are. Repetition.
No matter how experienced you are. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I just think you actually can't say it enough. No, you really can't say it enough. But it is about the forcing yourself into being more relaxed. And then all the comedians that we worked with over the years at the Comedy Store, your London Palladium, everything, they were all nervous backstage, especially when they were going on at 2:00 in the morning at the Comedy Store. All of us, I've seen every comic walking back in the dressing room going, keep it tight, because they know what a tightrope that is. But as soon as...
Well, that's the other thing, I suppose, which I would say to anybody writing anything funny, whether it's, for a speech or wherever, is keep it tight and just look at it again and again and try not to repeat something you've said. Yes, for repetitive effect, but don't start... If you can say something concisely, say it concisely, and to be your own editor, and that's really important. And again, Skinner, who's written and spoken, but he's got a book called On the Road, which it's about his tour in, I think it was about 2007, when he went back to it for the first time in ages, and he wrote really concisely about constructing jokes and constructing comedy. But he talks in that about 1 word extra in a sentence and the whole joke can go down, or 1 word too few. And he would go back, and obviously you haven't got this luxury if you're making a one-off speech, but he would go back and work out what would happen and what he'd missed out, and try it again the next day, and not give up on an idea just because it didn't work once. I had a routine I used to do about Colin Jackson, or as Colin Jackson, the athlete, commentator now. And it was a routine I did about how athletics, when you go and see it live, you realise is actually nothing more than a glorified school sports day. And I said, it's true. You think about it. I'm sure before too long you'll hear Colin Jackson in the commentary box saying, do you know what he's done there in the 100 metres is absolutely brilliant. But now the big question is, can he go on and win the sack race and the egg and spoon? And I'd say that, and people would go, "Oh, that's quite funny." And I thought, I know this is a funny idea. I know it's a funny idea. And I don't know why, but I hadn't done the old rule of three, the old rule of three that we live by. But I thought that the routine was quite long. There was lots of it before that. So then one night I just said, if he could go on to win the sack race, the egg and spoon, and a pear and strays. Woof! And you think, that was just 2 syllables or 3 syllables, but one beat short, pear and strays. And suddenly, that isn't the funniest thing. It's not funnier than the other 2, but it's the third. Sack race, the egg and spoon, and a pear and strays. Well, little things like that, little tricks that you learn, little nudges, and again, I'd forgotten it.
Is it easier to do it in somebody else's voice? Do you get away with more by using somebody else's voice? Is it like a vent act, a ventriloquist act, whereby the puppet can get away with more?
I don't know. I can see that both ways, really. I remember years ago, Jeff Green, who was a wonderful comic and still working in Australia, I believe. But Jeff said to me, "It's easy for you, mate. You just got to do a funny voice and people laugh." And I thought about that, and I thought, no, actually, you've got to have the routine. You've got to have the material. And when I was doing the television show with Ronnie Ancona, I said to her this quote, and she said, "It's so not true when you're doing the routines that we were doing the sketches physically on television, because effectively, take Lucas and Williams, for instance, who are around at the same time as us, more or less, doing the thing they used to do, rock profiles. They actually no, not doing rock profiles, doing sketches. They had to score a goal, as I'd said, where we had to score a hat trick, because with their sketches, once they had gone off after rock profiles, with their sketches, no one's going to say that doesn't look like that person, that doesn't sound like that person. They just say, is it funny? But as an impressionist, certainly on television, in sketches, you have to say, does it look like them? Tick. Does it sound like them? Tick. Is it funny? Phew. Hat trick. Every time some other comedian has to score a goal. And you think, so actually it makes it harder because you're being judged on 3 things. Doing live stand-up, you're still being judged on 2 things. Is the voice good? Nowadays, it's also, do we know who the hell that person is? Because we watch Netflix all the time. We don't know what Channel 4 is. But yeah, you've still got to have the material. You can't just do a funny voice. But to answer the other part of your question, doing a voice does make a joke funnier.
It's interesting to talk about actually how even comics who've been doing it for 30 years like yourself need to get back to full fitness in a sense as well. How do people who want to use more humour do it? Do they have to just regularly practice? Is it like going to the comedy gym?
Well, yeah, I think you always have to, if you're doing anything in public, nerves come in the way. I've started playing the piano, as you mentioned in your introduction, in public, doing this show now where hopefully I'll be doing it again probably next year, where I combine playing 15 live pieces of romantic piano music. They're not funny. I'm not Bill Bailey, but I do jokes in between about the pieces or about the composers and then play the piano. That's probably the hardest thing I've ever done, because you have 2 lots of nerves. You have the nerves of, is it funny? And then the nerves of, can I now put that completely out of my head and play the piano? And that has been the hardest thing I've ever done, the 2 things together, because the nerves and the concentration for the piano are so different, and you have to just completely block anything else out. But the rehearsal for that is immense. And yet, as much as you rehearse, certainly playing a piece on the piano for me as a beginner, and for any pianist, really any pianist, I've got several friends who are professional pianists, and they say the same thing. They'll play it, first of all, once they've learned it, to 1 friend, then maybe to 3 friends. Then maybe they'll do a small concert with 10, 20 people. And then if they're performing in front of the Royal Albert Hall, Albert Hall or Wigmore Hall or wherever, then they may be ready, but they'd have done lots of other concerts on the way to doing the Wigmore or the Royal Albert Hall. You have to take it in stages, but you have to be prepared for that extra level of nerves that puts you off completely. Even making a wedding speech, you go through it in your bedroom, and you think, yeah, I know it. Yeah, I can look up, I know that, or I know the whole thing, or I know how to do it. Your nerves are going to get in the way so much when you see people. And it's a bit like the old thing, Glenn Hoddle, I think, was the first thing the manager to say. You just can't practice penalties. You can't recreate the tension. You can't recreate that experience of standing there in front of 80,000 people, plus, another 2 billion worldwide. You can't replicate that. You train it. And it's the same, but you can be as prepared as you can be.
Well, that's mentally preparing yourself, isn't it? As we call it in psychology, anchoring yourself into states whereby you know that you have got that to such a degree. And by the way, everybody should rush and see you, because it's an extraordinary show when you're doing the piano and the comedy in between. It really is. I mean, it's like two great feats at once, because I marvel.
It has been my Everest. It has been my Everest.
Well, you've conquered it, my friend. In business, is it survival of the fittest or survival of the funniest?
I would imagine the fittest, really. I would imagine the fittest. I would imagine the funny thing is a bonus. I'd imagine it helps a lot. To be liked, to be warm. People like people who make them laugh, to make people listen to you, to show that you've listened to other people. All those things, as we said, go to creating comedy, to making somebody funny. But I'd imagine it's an ingredient. Just being funny on your own is not going to make you a very successful businessman unless your business is comedy.
But it might take you to the next level.
Definitely. It can make a difference hugely. I think it can make a huge difference. Yeah, being funny. And just sharing, just listening to people. And what's the difference in a way between being nice to people and being funny? Being nice means you're being warm, you're being considerate, you're probably being quite witty with them, you're being, that is what I think for me would be the most important thing. And humour comes into that, being funny comes into that, yeah. But I think just generally respecting people and being nice to them and wanting the best for them and helping them, and those are the things that I would look for most in business. I hope.
Well, no, I think that's a big part of the whole humourology concept. We're going to end the show with the bit we like to call quick-fire questions, and I always say that like I've written a little sort of sting for that, but I haven't yet. Who's the funniest business person you've met?
I would probably say yes. I think it was his name, Steve Lee, formerly of the Chartered Institute of Waste Management.
Would you rather be considered clever or funny? Well, the fart noise was enough, to be honest with you. We'll just edit round that.
I'd rather be considered, of all things, always kind and nice. But I suppose of those two, probably clever, weirdly. But that's just me being egotistical. Isn't that ridiculous? And as I say, I'm not a born comic. I don't feel I'm a born comic. I don't know what I am born, but witty is what I'd rather be. But if I had to, witty. I would never say funny.
Okay.
Isn't that odd? Humorous. I'd rather be humorous.
Okay. What book makes you laugh?
I don't tend to laugh at literature. I if anything, poetry, and the poetry of John Hegley and Henry Normal and sometimes Roger McGough, but particularly Henry Normal. If you don't know Henry's poetry, I'd recommend you go and buy it. If you like, I can probably supply it, but that's about as far as this rhyme goes. It'll keep me on my toes. To sound like Henry Normal is not abnormal.
What film makes you laugh?
I'd like to see it again. A film that I used to love watching was Take the Money and Run, a Woody Allen film in which he plays a bank robber. And one of the classic scenes, he turns up with a note to rob the bank, and he puts it under the bank teller's desk, and he can't read it. He goes, I've got a gub. What's a gub? He said, no, it's gun. It's gun. It definitely says gub. I think that's the funniest thing I've ever seen.
What word makes you laugh?
Ooh, I don't think I have a word that makes me laugh. No, I can't think of a word that makes me laugh straight away.
That's all right.
That's not very quick fire, is it?
Okay, but serious side of it, what's not funny?
What's not funny? I think something I don't find funny at all is inventive swearing. There's been a big trend for this ever since the thick of it, really, of people swearing in the funniest, most convoluted way. And I've always had a problem with swearing. I don't like swearing. If I swear, it's because I've dropped something on my foot, or I've missed an open goal, or I've missed an easy shot at snooker, or I've hit my head on the swimming pool. But I don't like swearing. And inventive swearing I find even less funny. There's a lot of it about. For fuck's sake.
Okay, and finally, desert island gags. If you could only take one gag with you to a desert island, what would it be?
I've only ever tried to buy one gag. When I was doing my telly show, I was desperate to use this gag, and I asked Tim Vine if I could have his gag and buy his gag. A lot of old-time comics are always buying gags off each other, and Tim wouldn't sell it. And the gag was, I can't remember, it was 21 years ago. I only remember the punchline, but it was something like this. At the time, Goran Ivanisevic had just beaten Tim Henman. He was world number 3 or 4. Henman was. Ivanisevic was, top 10. Wimbledon champion, 2001. And Tim Vine was doing this brilliant joke, and he said, "There's I can't do Tim Vine's voice." He said, "There's a lot of warlocks and wizards in the world of tennis. Tim Henman, he's a warlock. Boris Becker, he's a wizard. And that Goran Ivanisevic." I love that. That is my perfect joke, and Tim Vine thought of it.
Alistair McGowan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.